Hi, I'm Bronwyn Williams. We're back with the small print, and today my guest is Ben Hunt. Ben, on this show, we like to get our guests to introduce themselves the way they would like to be introduced. So over to you.
Well, thanks, Bronwyn. It's great to be here today. It's a little bit of a challenge to introduce myself. As my wife says, I have a hard time keeping a job. So I was a professor of political science of all oxymorons for about 10 years. I left to start a software company, just a self-taught programmer, coder, and the like. So did that, sold that company, and then started a hedge fund. Where managed that for 8 years. In this racket of managing other people's money, and we grew that to about $1 billion. Then we never lost money for our clients, which I'm still really proud of. But from 2009 onwards, it's our returns really flatline. And so I gave all the money back to our clients and started trying to figure out, what does make markets work? And drawing on my academic background, which was all about narratives, which was all about how words are used in politics. Drawing on my software company, which was about understanding unstructured data, finding patterns in unstructured data, and then applying that now to markets. So what are the patterns? What are the scripts, as I like to call them, the story arcs that we tell ourselves over and over and over again in markets and in politics too, of course, right? And can we actually, use that understanding to try to manage money better? So I, started writing about that in a glorified blog I'll call Epsilon Theory. I started that in 2013, and that's, it's been really gratifying how that's grown to a nice sized audience in our little pond, at least, of financial media. And started a company 4 years ago, which is devoted to doing those things I just talked about. Right? It's basic research on narratives and the stories we tell each other, the structure of those stories we tell each other. That sort of basic research and finding investment applications for it, and then publishing and writing about it. So under that Epsilon Theory brand name. So the company's name is Second Foundation Partners, which is a nod to Isaac Asimov and the Foundation trilogy. Because like Asimov, I really do believe that human beings are hardwired to respond to, $10 phrase, unstructured data, the words that we hear, the images that we see. And I believe that everyone, meaning every central banker, every politician, every corporate executive, gets that, right? So that we've always lived in a world of narratives, but I believe even more so today, we live in a world that's dominated by constructed narratives to which we human beings are hardwired to respond in fairly predictable ways. So long-winded answer to your question, but that's what I do. I do research on narratives and I write about it.
Absolutely. Well, I know you from Twitter and from your Epsilon Theory blog, which I'm a huge fan of.
Thank you.
I also like the way you think, because I think you and I have had similar arguments with people with what's happening in the world of macroeconomics at the moment, and feeling this sense of disconnect that perhaps the solutions on table are a bit too simplified. And I'm speaking, of course, about the virtualization of everything. I mean, as someone understands the economy and markets, we understand that there's a difference between the real and there's a difference between the unreal in this world. And the unreal are exactly those story layers that you're talking about. And the unreal economy is pretty much most of it. It's the water we swim in, right? It's money is part of the unreal economy. The financialized economy, where all the velocity of moving things around from person to person, that's all part of the unreal economy. And of course, now we've got the next layer of unreal economy, which is like the actually virtualized economy. And there you also have a split in terms of the crypto economy on the one side and the sort of metaverse economy that's coming up too. But what all those things have in common is they all hang together on stories. Like value in the story layer essentially comes from two places. It comes from fear, or it comes from belief, which we tend to call greed, right? So either we believe in the stories because we want to believe in them, because we think that they can make our lives better, or we believe in the stories because we're afraid not to believe in them. And if we don't believe in those stories or buy into that consensus, what we might find ourselves, with a very large fine from the IRS or in jail, quite frankly, or if we live in a less friendly place, we might be shot. Like we're forced to kind of believe in those stories, either for fear or for greed-based reasons. And I think that what's been very interesting for me is that I've come from actually quite a similar background to what you did. Like my last real job, I'm also quite unemployable and not able to actually work in a normal job. My last real job was doing what you did. I published financial newsletters. So we looked at macroeconomic trends and we sold that research. So I understand like that sort of way of looking at the world. And because of that, was around in the very earliest days when that first Bitcoin paper came out. And this idea of this different story was written. And that's what Bitcoin really is, a different story. I mean, the Fed and the dollar is also just a story. It's just an older story, very similar to like older religions have been around for a longer time. And now you've got younger religions that are competing for that same surplus of belief that is slushing around. Terry Pratchett is my favorite author, and I have to shoehorn in all these conversations. And that's exactly what he spoke about, that there's like a finite supply of belief or credulity among human beings. And when we are able to deploy more of that belief to believing in different things, we're able to make different things sort of float. And there is a sort of a story to talk about how the reduction in religious belief has almost freed up our brains to believe in more crazy things in the financial space, right? Because that's the critical difference between Bitcoin and crypto and the decentralized world that has branded itself, that sold itself as a story of being a credible threat to the more fear-based story that the dollar-based economy is built on, is kind of coming from. Because the crypto Bitcoin story doesn't have force to back it up. It doesn't have the fear lever. It's only really playing with the greed and faith lever, which means that it had to tell even better stories. It had to get people to buy in organically. But the story that was told around it was that this is sort of like a white knife that's going to save us from the fear-based world of the dollar and debt and all the rest of it. But there seem to be some sort of practical limitations there, that at the end of the day, we are still dealing with stories, and that most of the real battle is still to be held in the real realm, where all the value of all the stories comes from, in the sort of physical presence of the here and now. And that's a very long monologue from me to sort of set the scene, but that's kind of the conversation I wanted to have from you. Like, what are some of your criticisms that you have been criticized about? Because I know you have, because I have too, for around the story that crypto is trying to sell to us, whether you want to call it crypto or DeFi or Bitcoin. I know that the various factions of the new church of the decentralized gods do not like to have their sort of brands overlapped, but at the end of the day, they're all kind of selling into that same story. What are some of the criticisms of the credibility of that story of DeFi being able to sort of save us from the stories that we've had before? What are the limitations there? Because there's still lots of true believers in that realm as much as they are in the old world too. And there's a fine line to be drawn, because of course the ideas of decentralizing and charging the castle and like breaking down the walls are quite attractive, because the old system doesn't work, and the church of finance that we have is very unfair. But the new stories that are being told are not necessarily the whole story either, in that they're still very interlinked. And there are perhaps a few flaws in that decentralized gospel that are worth interrogating if we do actually want to change the stories we've seen in our world.
Well, Bronwyn, I think that, and this will play off of a couple of the points you just made. I think to answer your question directly, right, the difficulty with singing a new song, with telling a new story, which in the case of Bitcoin, crypto more broadly, is a story I'm enormously behind and in favor of.
Yeah,
it's a story of personal autonomy. It's a story of independence. It's a story of ingenuity. I love the story and the
Me too.
energy,
it's a great story. It's a
right?
lovely story.
Well, but it's a story. It's truly an old story. I like to call an old story, right? Which is not. It doesn't come from the state. It comes from us, right? And it's a story that I want to put my weight behind, right? Whatever weight I can put behind it, right? To try to promote, like any story. I want to be a missionary for that story. But I will tell you there are three stories I'll tell you that to your question, what stands in the way. So it's not just that we have fiat money today, it's that we are in a fiat world today, where everything is presented to us as proclamation. Right? So it's not just fiat money, it's fiat news, it's fiat content, everything that we are inundated with 24/7. The messages we hear from our little dopamine machines, our smartphones, right?
Yeah.
It's constructed, it's presented to us, right? It's opinion presented as fact. So there is an enormous crowding out effect, an enormous power that what I like to call the nudging state, the nudging oligarchy, big corporations, they have an enormous power to crowd out any great old story in a new bottle, right? Old wine in a new bottle, like crypto.
Yeah, not even just crowd it out, but to take it and distort it just a little bit, just enough to change it, to change the essence, but without changing the aesthetic, right?
That's exactly right, right? So there's, I'll tell you another old story, and it's when, I'm not a religious guy, but there are wonderful stories from the Bible. One of them is when, of course, Jesus is famously presented as a, kind of a gotcha question, where he's presented with the coin with the head of, the Roman emperor on it. And he said, again, it was a gotcha question, should we, not pay taxes, right? And
are you with us or are you with them?
Right? And his reply was, of course, render unto Caesar that which is Caesar's, render unto God that which is God. Right? And what is God's is our mind, our autonomy of mind. Our identity.
Because the coin is just a story, right?
Right. And so this is the core way in which I think Bitcoin and crypto become subverted, is because they act in that realm of money. And money is the sine qua non, it is the reason that the state exists. That's it. That's it. That is why government exists. And it is existential. And so it is a battleground for ideas that I think is a terrible battleground to fight on, because the full power of the nudge, right? The use of whether it's panopticon narrative, right, and kind of ratting on each other and watching ourselves. The entire panoply of narrative effort, and the effort is enormous, exists in the world of money, both from Wall Street and from Washington, using Washington as a catch-all phrase for all national capitals, right, for all governments. So my personal view is that the battlefield of money is the wrong place to fight this fight. And my goal is to find other areas, right, where this fight can be won, can be fought and won. It's not from the top down, it's from the bottom up. And it requires, again, telling these old stories, right, of empathy, of self-knowledge, of autonomy of mind. These stories work, right? And these are stories that can hook in our brains just as well, if not better, than the new crappy stories of everything being a transaction, right? Or, everything is framed in an us versus them. Everything is framed in a tribal grammar. Those are old stories too, that the state and big corporations love to present, and they're blaring them out at us constantly. I think it's possible, though, to build these old stories on a stronger foundation than in the realm of money. And it really the kicker here is, to your original point, is to reject the constructed world that is all around us, the fiat world, and get closer to the real. Get closer to real people, to real physical objects, to real activities, what I like to call making and protecting and teaching. And to exit from this speculation layer that oozes over everything today. Everything. It's not that we can, the other phrase I like to say is a phrase actually from another church, the Mormon church of all people, right? It's to be in the world, but not of the world. Meaning, look, we all want to be successful people. We've got to take care of ourselves, our families, and we have to be in this world, this fiat world. We have to be able to navigate it, but we can't give our hearts to it. And that's what I want to write about, right? Is, how do you keep from getting sucked in your heart?
Yes.
To all this.
I absolutely love what you're saying. Obviously I've spent a lot of time in religious indoctrination as a small child, but still there's some of those both make a lot of sense. Your heart is where your treasure lies, right? So if your treasure is lying in a Bitcoin vault, it's very different. So if your treasure is baked in your own garden, and the sort of mottos I've adopted for myself at the moment, because of my own personal failings, I've decided to adopt that: tend your own garden and only connect. The only connect is a lot harder because I don't naturally like many people, but you kind of have to, because you realize that I have to. You have to work together. That anything you do in this place is like a team sport. And if you refuse to play the game, you don't get to change it at all. But the bigger point that you're making,
I've got to interrupt, because this is like a question that I like to ask people, because I have such very answer for it. So, imagine, yesteryear when you were actually able to travel freely, right? So you go on an airplane. So you're sitting in an airplane, there are all these people around you. Of all the people in the airplane, how many of them do you think you could or would like to be friends with?
Probably none. But that if you actually spend time with them one-on-one, you get to know them all. Right.
So, exactly. So my answer is two. I figure that, on a crowded plane, there are probably two people that I would kind of like to, if I was able to meet all of them, I'd like to be friends with. And it is kind of an antisocial thing. And I find that it's an interesting question, because there are a lot of people who say, oh my God, half of them are 50, they're all here. And it's like, there's a very, I think, interesting.
My own behavior. If I did get onto a plane and anyone tried to talk to me, I'd very quickly put earphones in.
All right, yeah.
I'm going to go to sleep now.
So anyway, it's an interesting
unlikely that I would exit a plane with a friend, but it has happened. I did once meet someone on a plane on the way to Los Angeles, and we ended up being friends there. So that was interesting. So you have to leave a corner for it. But the point is that you have to try and connect, and you have to see people as individuals, as of course in and of themselves, and not just means, because the means is also part of the story layer, right? Because we can justify anything with a lovely story, and forgetting about the actual fact that there are people involved here, people that have agency and individuality that end up becoming pawns in somebody else's story, which is also not a particularly nice story.
Because that is such the crux of all of this, right? Is that every political party, every government, every politician sees you as a means to an end. Every corporation, almost by definition, sees you as a means to an end. And the important thing in life, and this goes back to freaking Aristotle, right, is to find your pack, to find people who don't treat you as a means to an end. If we're lucky, we find that in our family. But there's some dysfunctional families where family members treat each other as means to an end too. But somehow, some way, you have to find those people who treat you as an autonomous human being and who require you to treat them in the same way. That's what makes life worth living, is finding that pack. And that's what protects you as well in a crazy world where we are used as fodder and feed by, again, not the jackbooted thugs, if we're fortunate enough not to live in a country where that's a possibility, but the nudging state and the nudging corporations, because exactly to your point, you are treated as a means to an end, not as an autonomous human being. It's the most important thing, Bronwyn.
Absolutely, you have to live. You have to not be a non-playable character. I know that's very politically tinged, but I'm working in a gaming startup at the moment, so I'm talking about this all the time. Not politics, it's games, but that's exactly it. You have to be playable, right? You have to use your agency. Well, when it comes to agency, the key is that if you don't use it, you're going to lose it, and that power rolls up, but it can only really be pulled down with great difficulty, and sometimes really not at all. So you have to be very, very careful about ceding that agency over, because basically once you've done that, you've kind of ceded those rights to all those good things that we've been speaking about. But that kind of brings back,
you hit the nail on the head, right? So when we talk about inalienable rights, and I really believe in this, right? That as a human being, right, that we have that inalienable right, right, at its core of autonomy, an autonomy of mind. And, they can't be taken away from us, those rights. They really can't. But we can give them away.
And we do that and it's easy to give them away, because the catch with giving your agency and your rights away is that it lets you off the hook from yourself for the consequences of your choices. It gives you freedom from responsibility, or pseudo freedom, a very Rousseauian sort of pseudo freedom, right? Like the freedom from responsibilities as opposed to the freedom to willingly choose your hard going forward. But it's very tempting, particularly if we are afraid of the consequences of our choices, to give that choice to someone else, because then if that other person, that authority figure, uses that choice badly, it's somehow not your fault, although it is, because you gave him the choice over you in the first place. But it's a protection thing. It's I think a lot of fear comes with that.
There is a lot of fear, but I think that I'll use that. I'm going to both kind of stamp myself with a total nerd side here, but it's something I learned from playing, from a dungeon master in Dungeons and Dragons a long time ago, right? And I never forget this phrase. It's really good. It says, being lawful good doesn't mean being lawful stupid, right? And what I take that to mean, and the way I've tried to apply this, is we do have to live in this world, a world where the righteous are beset on all sides by iniquities of evil men, right? Use a Pulp Fiction quote there. But you're right, we can't be afraid. And, not but we do have to live in the world as it is. And we do have to play what I like to think of as a long game. Right? Because I'm playing this game, yes, for myself, but also for my children and their children and their children's children. I think one has to play a non-myopic, long game. And that goes again back to this question about crypto, right? In that this kind of long game, I think that fighting that battle on the field of money is...
You're already in Caesar's house, right? The price, the value of your coins is already determined by the supply of the other currency coming into the system, but we don't want to really talk about that. And it's still a casino. It's not nothing in the world of crypto or in the financialized economy, which they'll teach you in like your first year of economics. The difference between the real economy and everything else is that everything else is claimed on the real economy. None of it's real, right? It's only the way I've been describing crypto is saying that it's a vast pool of potential energy, but potential energy doesn't mean anything until it's actually set into motion, right? It's got to be used and deployed to change something in the world of the real. You have to exit the casino in order to see the value of that, in order to actually make a sort of stand in this sort of wanting to make, build, protect, teach kind of realm.
There's a great point, Bronwyn, and I think that so much of our lives today, not just in crypto, but so much of our lives today are trapped in that casino, as you aptly call it. And so there's this great story. I mean, you're probably familiar with this, but I bet many of your listeners may not be. But it's the story goes back to the gold rush days out in San Francisco. They've got Cannery Row out there, where they do a lot of canned fish. So this is, back in kind of the gold rush days, San Francisco, on a gold standard, a gold backed dollar bill or gold was in very short supply. So, currency, actually having something, a lot of stuff is done on just barter, trade this for that. And so what often happens in these kind of barter systems is that you get a cryptocurrency, in this case, tins of canned sardines became a currency of sorts, right? So, you would trade, 5 tins of canned sardines for, a shovel. Make that up. Anyway, it was a currency, these tins of canned sardines. And, as the story goes, some enterprising guy had some cans of sardines and he was trading them, like 3 cans of sardines for, an apple or something like that, something for lunch. And he said, wait a second. Why am I doing this? Why am I trading cans of food for food? I have food right here. So he just opened up one of his cans of sardines and ate it. And he went, oh my God, this is terrible. The sardines have gone, I know they were canned, but these are awful. And,
very old sardines.
Right. And the response was, son, those aren't eating sardines. Those are trading sardines. And that is what I think has happened to crypto, right? In Bitcoin in particular, is what I like to call Bitcoin trademark. It's the
TM, yes, like science TM and Bitcoin TM, yeah.
The idea of Bitcoin into a trading sardine, right? It's the only place where it lives. It just lives inside that casino, that Wall Street casino.
Unrealized potential, so much unrealized potential.
But here's the thing, I think that potential, yes, there's real enormous unrealized potential in Bitcoin itself, right? Which I think is really elegant art.
It is really amazing technology. It could be awesome.
It is. But it's even more than a technology, right? It's encouraging that way of thinking, that energy of autonomous thinking, to not apply it though to Wall Street and making money and speculation. It gets that energy becomes trapped in the trading sardine, becomes trapped in the casino, to your point. And my goal is to get that energy applied to real life at a community level from the bottom up. That's where that energy, I think, can change the world over a really long period of time. So it's a long game, it's avoiding the casino, and it's reconnecting with what is real. That's the sermon for the day.
That is the sermon for the day. It's a lot to do with my sermons too. Like you got to get back to what's real, guys. I mean, because the problem is this whole sort of virtualization and this whole sort of storifying of everything and abstracting of everything. It goes far beyond money. If it was only money, we could have these conversations on a philosophical level and still complain about it. But it's much deeper than that. There's so much abstraction in the way that we are connecting with each other in our personal lives and the way we even understanding ourselves, right? So there's like a virtualization of the human experience too. Again, an outsourcing of and a choice-based, like giving up of the real for the unreal, because it's simplified, it's sanitized, it's faster, it's shinier, it's got greater velocity, it feels somehow safer, although it's probably definitely not. But the whole sort of virtualization of everything, it comes back to what you were saying about sort of fiat news and everything else too. It's these stories, the unreal being sold and swallowed as being actually real. And you start to see this with the sort of prevalence of digital assets, which I don't have any sort of moral issue with. I mean, by all means, if you want to trade trading cards, whether they JPEGs or whether they physical cards or cans of sardines, I mean, that's fine. It's fair game. It's all the rest of it. But what I think is quite insidious is this idea that it's the same as the real. And perhaps the most scary things for me are the people that are trying to virtualize their goods and almost trying to virtualize themselves in that same sense. Like I'm sure you've seen many of the people that have tried to make NFTs of real objects and then destroy the real objects in order to have the real object live on forever in the virtual realm, which is as close to religion as you can possibly get. The idea of destroying the real in order to preserve it for eternity is probably one of the most absolutely profane thoughts that has become almost a mainstream idea within a few short months. I don't know how you feel about that.
I think it's an expression of art. I do. I appreciate it in that sense. Right? Because it makes me feel very uncomfortable. And I think that's what good art should be doing, is making us feel very uncomfortable. Right? The thing I have a bigger problem with, Bronwyn, is the destruction of the real to create it virtual when it is applied by not an artist as a protest, but by the state, by corporations as a means of control, right? It's Plato's cave all over again. So, it's the projection of these narratives, these scripts, that I think are used to control rather than to protest or make us feel uncomfortable. They are, to your point, designed to make us feel very comfortable. Right, it's soma of Brave New World, right? Drink this, you'll feel a lot better. And it's that
you will.
It's the destruction of the real to create the virtual for soma and control that bothers me infinitely more than somebody say, well, here's a Magic the Gathering, card.
Yeah, and an object, and as an art statement, it's cute. It's like it's art, like you say. But I see that as being a philosophy. Like people are starting to adopt, like, let me die and upload my mind to a machine is something that we hear a lot about in my circle of work. And it's like, kill me now so that I can live on digitally forever. But you're not going to live on digitally. A flattened, digitized, far more discrete version of the full complexity of what you were can live on, but destroying the sort of perfect to make an imperfect copy as a philosophy or for a society, I think that this is a new narrative that's being taken on board now. Like the reality privilege conversations, all these things are hovering around the same space of this poisonous, very dangerous, very seductive idea that says that the sanitized, perfected digital is actually better than the messy, flawed vessel that we have right now. Even if we don't understand the nuances of what that messy, flawed vessel is, I think it's probably the closest thing we have to a cohesive religious movement that we're going to start seeing. And like the Bitcoinization of the world is part of that. Bitcoin allowed us to believe in that. We started there, and then we can start to believe in objects that can live on and have almost a digital immortal soul for physical objects. And the next step, of course, is to do that with living things too, right? The sort of sacrificing of the real for the virtual. And I think the point of no return is when you have to actually burn, kill, crush, destroy the real in order to go there, as you're saying. And that can be both in a literal sense, like we can talk about playing cards and pieces of art, which is very cute and all, but it gets more serious as you sort of go down that road. But it gets more serious when you get to the destruction of truth for the replacement of a manufactured truth, TM. Like what you're saying, like what I've been starting to call like many of the blockchain consensus-based systems, which sound great, right? Only we have to kind of remember that consensus doesn't exactly equal consent, and that decentralization is not exactly democracy, because of course democracy is designed to protect the minority and the weak against the strong and the majority, whereas decentralized consensus is designed to get the majority view to carry. So it's like a fundamental sort of difference in the sorts of societies and organizations we're building there. But also this idea of immutable trust and the trustless society as being an aspiration rather than like an absolute aberration is, I think, also a dangerous narrative idea. And when I say dangerous ideas can be used like most weapons or tools to build or to break. But this idea of trustless, like cutting human trust and human connection and trust and belief in your pack out and replacing it with trust in code, is also something that I've been reading further and further down the fringes of the internet, where it's not in the mainstream. It sounds great, right? Like, yay, we can all agree, we can get rid of fake news, and we can like all agree on stuff, and like it's going to be the real truth, not the manufactured truth. But as you start to go down those rabbit holes to how far that ideology is spun, it's become a kind of a religion that, again, humans are bad, must be cut out of the system and must be destroyed and replaced by immutable code. So that comes back to the sort of destruction of the real for the unreal, which is perfected, because the unreal can be perfected and protected and entirely intact. But there's another layer that's perhaps closer to us and the challenges with like fiat news that we're starting to see now, that I saw quite early in the sort of the curve of adoption of the blockchain hype cycle and all the rest of it, is this idea of using immutable truth and consensus-based ledgers like blockchain type Bitcoins as basically a lie laundromat, right? Where you can take lies and you can turn them into truth simply by listing them on an immutable chain. And I think that is a particularly dangerous idea. And we started to see this with some of the early experiments in like property registries, where it's like, yeah, all these people in Africa don't have title deeds for their homes. Let's get them onto a blockchain and they can have their own title deed. But of course, it's garbage in, garbage out, or lies in, and somehow this laundered truth comes out that the most powerful person in the world, in the room or in the farm, gets to put his name onto the immutable title deed, and suddenly you've manufactured what was untrue into something that is immutably true. And when we start to believe in digital consensus-based systems rather than believing in each other, we are outsourcing agency as much as we believe that we're actually opting into a decentralized self-sovereign system. And I think that this is something that scares me to my absolute core. And I know that most of my friends in crypto think that I'm completely mad and gone off the deep end. But I think at a philosophical level, it's a very scary idea.
Well, Bronwyn, one of the ways, started off talking about how we're hardwired. And one of the principal ways in which the human animal is hardwired is that it needs something, anything, that mentally we can plant our feet on. That we can say, okay, the ground is steady beneath my feet in my thoughts and beliefs as I try to make my way in this world and create a better space for myself and my family and my family. And what we've seen, what we've all experienced over the past 12 years since the great recession.
First shoe dropped, yeah, basically.
The global financial crisis, and then exacerbated with the pandemic, is that there's no aspect of our lives today, no aspect of our social lives today, where we feel like the ground is steady beneath our feet. And you've seen this in different times in history before. I would point to the period of time between 200 and 400 AD, call it the long, slow decline of the Roman Empire, And you see this chronicled with people like, St. Augustine, who's writing about it. He was there in Rome, he leads, he goes up to North Africa, and he writes about it. And what the human reaction to the ground not being steady beneath our feet is to find new ground that is steady, whether that is a faith in immutable code, right? Which I would use it. That's just it's give me a freaking break, right? I mean, or whether it's
people.
we must have something to which we can plant our feet, and it is harder and harder to find that something, but our primate brain still inexorably looks for it. So that is one of such a principal way in which we are hardwired, and why I think it's so important to present people with some of the old stories, right? Of knowing thyself, love thy neighbor as you love thyself, stories of empathy, stories of belonging, of self-reliance and self-knowledge.
And forgiveness, because blockchains and crypto is inherently unforgiving.
Exactly.
There's no redemption in an immutable ledger system.
It's
winner takes all.
Non-human story, right? And I get it. There is comfort and refuge there.
It's very fair, but it's at the same time it's horrific. Getting what we actually want is almost always a disaster, even if the utopia is being built by people who you quite like.
Bronwyn, so I've been thinking a lot about the word arc, both ARC and ARK. And in the ARC realm, the arc, the best quote I know is from Martin Luther King, where he said, the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. And I've been thinking about that a lot recently, and I've been thinking, does it really?
Not necessarily. Your past performance is no guarantee of future returns. We know this if you work in finance for any amount of time.
Right? And by arc, he means the story arc, right? The arc, the path of the moral universe by which we need the stories we tell ourselves, the stories around which we organize our lives. The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. I feel like the arc of the moral universe is now beset on all sides, as I was saying before, by the inequities of evil and men. And I think that what we can do, and this is my goal, this is my life's work, it's not to fight this in the realm of money. It's to try to illuminate for people that there is a moral universe, that there is an arc, a story arc that goes with that, and that it is being attacked, right, by nudges, by the constructed stories of the state and the corporation, because they don't think of us as autonomous human beings. They see us as a means to an end. And by illuminating that, I feel like people can say, oh, I am being sold. I don't have to give my heart to this political party or this corporation. But no, I give my heart to the people who deserve my heart, which are the people who treat me as a human being, with, to your point, mercy and forgiveness, as well as concrete in the world support and the strength of the pack. So that's how I think we fight this battle, right? And that's how I think we try to reclaim the arc of the moral universe and get it bending back towards liberty and justice for all. The thing that, at least in the States, we pledge allegiance to. Imagine liberty and justice for all. So, look, nothing gets bigger or more important than that. So it's inspiring. I think you can get people going for it, and that's the long game, I think.
find your pack and look after it, right? You know, like that's what you got to do. But like just listening to what you speaking about there, we can come back to those like terrible Twitter-based cliches of like you'll own nothing and you're going to be happy. I know that's like bandied about quite a bit, but it kind of has quite a darker connotation to it when you unpack it, in that it's become almost a slogan of a generation to start to chase happiness and to avoid ownership, to see that actually as being a positive. And the word ownership, I think, is what's basically critical with our whole conversation here, is that you have to actually own your own agency, own your own responsibility, own your own stuff, actually, rather than chasing happiness, which is just a story, right? So it's like turning that around. It's like it's not about owning your car or owning your business, as good as those things are. It's more about owning your own personhood and your own life, which is so easy to outsource to a story, right? To attach yourself to something else.
That's right. No, it's so easy, you know, the pursuit of happiness, right, is, it's so easy to get on that hedonic treadmill, right, because it's never enough. It's never enough. And
it's subjective.
It is, right? But there is a, to your point, the ownership we have to take is ownership over our own autonomy of mind. That's it. Because we can give that away. We do give that away so freely and so easily. But that at its core is, I think, what we have to reclaim. We have to reclaim space, right? You know, some distance between the blaring of the transactional and othering narratives that we've inundated with 24/7. Find some comma, some sort of pause where we can start to distance ourselves, distance our monkey brains, right, from the messages that are overwhelming right now. So that's where I think we go. I think actually if we can achieve that, trying to find that distance, that space, then I really do have faith, right, that there's an up and to the right arrow for humanity. I'm not a pessimist at all, right, because I do see the energy, that entrepreneurialism, that self-reliance that comes out of projects like Bitcoin and crypto, for God's sake. Right?
Yeah.
It's just channeling that energy away
from the siren song of the old stories, right? Exactly. Well, I don't have anything else to add to that. I mean, I think that's a pretty amazing point to end this conversation, unless there was another point that you wanted to make. I just can't beat that.
Nope, I think that's a good one to go out on. It really is.
Yeah, go out on a high. No one ever congratulates you for sticking around for longer than your amazing moment. But Ben, where can people find you and to follow your work and subscribe to your services? How can they continue this conversation?
So it's Epsilon Theory. You know, epsilon comes from, econometric. Epsilon is error. It's the error term in all these econometric equations. And it ain't error, right? Epsilon is where human behavior lives. So it's epsilontheory.com. It's at Epsilon Theory on Twitter. And I hope people come check it out.
You definitely should. I certainly highly recommend it. And thank you for being so generous as to come on our little South African show, Ben. It's been an absolute treat.
My pleasure. Thank you, Bronwyn.
Thank you. If you enjoyed this conversation, please subscribe to our YouTube channel and rate us on all your preferred podcast platforms. If you'd like to find out more about what we're doing, please join our Substack community via the link in the comments below. And as always, we'd love to hear your suggestions for future guests and conversation topics.